Hi, and welcome to Rockdale again. This time I'm going to build a small town on the side of this U-turn intersection that we have featured in the previous video. The entrance to this small town is in here. It's formed by that three-way intersection that I'm actually going to talk about in a separate video next time. So this little town was first started by doing these slightly more modern looking detached houses in here, right next to the intersection. But I later decided that I actually want to create something slightly larger and even maybe with some old looking buildings. So I built these two roads that are intersecting in here and creating like a nice town square with a very nice looking town hall for like the most dominant building on the town square. So the idea behind this little town is that back in the day, maybe like some hundreds of years ago, there probably were two merchant roads that intersected at this place, and usually that means that these kinds of crossroads were very important. Maybe some kind of an inn was built first at this place, which these days might actually be the building for the town hall. And later, obviously, more and more buildings were built. Maybe some kind of different buildings, like the inn might have just been upgraded with more buildings, stuff like that. And then people decided to live here and so on and so on. And over the years, the entire town just became bigger. So I wanted to create old-looking buildings near the town center. And then the further we go from that town center, the more modern houses we are going to put here. So I'm just trying to fill the blocks like you can see here with some of the buildings, using even these cube houses in here. Very nice looking assets from the workshop. In here I built like a gravel circle around the center, and inside the circle I wanted to kind of mark it where I would like to put the old buildings, and outside the circle I only wanted to put the modern buildings. So to kind of give me an idea to like where I want to do things. I also use these vanilla buildings for police station, school, and the fire station. They definitely fit this place very well. And then I just proceeded to create some of these little blocks with the old buildings in the center. I wanted to be as random as possible to kind of emphasize a bit more that this entire town was built over hundreds of years, not really in one project, in one go. So I wanted to keep the 90-degree connections to a minimum. On the side of this little town, I wanted to build a industrial area, like old buildings mixed with something slightly more modern and even like recent warehouse steel buildings, something like that. So I already picked all the buildings like this, and then I just use Move It to kind of arrange them into like a nice shape. So I use these vanilla buildings because they are looking very, very nice. I want to make like an entrance to this zone. Then right after the entrance, I wanted to build that big brick factory floor building, something like that. And then put these warehouse buildings on the side. I on purpose built these warehouse buildings not aligned with the rest of the buildings here to kind of emphasize a bit more that they are new and they don't exactly belong in the old looking industrial area. These days, this industrial area in real life probably would have been completely abandoned, maybe repurposed, most probably for warehouse buildings or warehouse places. Yeah, they definitely don't function as industrial buildings these days, in real life at least, mostly. I also put those garages there on the side just to make it look more bigger. Then I decided to do something slightly different. I wanted to first create the road network first. It's not exactly what I do. I usually create like a few blocks and then fill them with buildings and then continue, roads, buildings, roads, buildings. But I wanted to build the roads first, like in one go, because I really wanted to be as random as possible, and I wanted to already have the roads completed So it would give me a better idea like how big the town is going to be, to kind of better select the buildings for each individual blocks. I try to be, like I said, more random, but more random than I usually am when creating like bigger areas in the center of the city, for example. So created these roads with not as many 90-degree connections. Especially these areas in the center I wanted to create with non-90-degree corners, but on the outskirts of the town, 90 degrees are obviously fine because those areas were probably built in one project, and 90 degrees just look good for them. I did this highway connection there, but that I actually later destroyed. I didn't want to have all the traffic go here instead of that detailed three-way intersection that we are going to feature in the next video, like I said. So yeah, doing these roads like that, trying to be kind of random with them. Now, filling up the blocks with on the outskirts, again with these slightly more modern buildings, using the buildings from the European Suburbia pack. I have seen comments saying that these kinds of buildings, this DLC with these buildings, is actually not that great because the buildings look very similar and a bit boring. But in my opinion, that's kind of the point. The buildings should look very similar because they have a very, very similar style. And it works. It works. It definitely creates a very nice looking neighborhoods. Now, I was also wanted to build some high density like apartment buildings. I already built those 4 block of flats buildings near that modern detached house neighborhood. But I also wanted to use some of these apartment buildings, even these vanilla buildings, because they look really nice, something that might have been built maybe like in the 70s, for example. The block of flats buildings might have been built maybe like in 50s, 60s, something like that. Also, some of these vanilla low-density buildings I used as well because they kind of create the illusion that on the outskirts of this little town we might have like a modern, like a luxury low-density family houses. And like I said, some of these block of flats buildings, it's quite common to actually see this in real life. You usually see like a old, old construction somewhere or old structures, and then out of a sudden you have these block of flats buildings. Again, might have been built maybe during the 50s, 60s, something like that. And they might have been created there because of that little industrial area that might have been still functional back in the day. Or maybe they were just created there to create some more capacities for people to live in next to the big city. This is the first little town where I really wanted to start doing more details. I downloaded all the details that seemed kind of useful for this little area. And after I finished doing the first phase kind of putting down the buildings, I started detailing this area as well. Some of these blocks with the old buildings definitely look like broken a bit. It's kind of not easy to actually make all these old buildings kind of fit together. So some of these blocks, some of these lines of buildings are kind of ending like suddenly, and maybe they are connected to something more modern, some modern buildings as well, which is perfectly normal, and you can definitely see that in real life a lot. Obviously, these buildings were not built in one go, like I said, they were built over hundreds of years. Well, these particular buildings, probably not. They might have been like late 19th century or early 20th, but maybe even older, especially the ones near the town center. Like the real old buildings, like the wooden structures, are probably long gone these days. But anyway, maybe like individual blocks might have been built in one go, but usually the buildings were not built in one project, so they don't exactly align. And the ends of these buildings might not look all that great. Maybe some buildings actually were, destroyed later, maybe even during the Second World War, maybe something like that. So yeah, just like that. And obviously some buildings might have been just destroyed to make way for something newer, especially like in the middle of the second half of the 20th century, when the feeling to preserve these old buildings was not all that strong back then. Anyway, putting down some of these even newer looking buildings, especially the commercial buildings, to kind of create some commercial areas in this little town. Obviously that is kind of needed. I wanted to create this little town to not be just purely residential. I obviously wanted to make it so that it can kind of sustain itself with the job it provides for all its residents. And obviously the people also need somewhere to go shopping. So like I said, filling up the blocks with some of these European suburbia pack buildings, and even some of those block houses. Even though the block houses, I'm not exactly all that satisfied with them in here, because they kind of seem to be a bit too nice looking for these areas. I might have picked something slightly lower, something slightly different maybe. But in the end, they actually work in this area, so it's fine. Now, I was not exactly sure about this block. I then decided to create like a really modern, really recent development area in here, like a project for these very modern, very recent residential apartment buildings. And it definitely works in these places, and it's definitely something that you might see in real life, especially in little towns, like very, very close to big cities, because obviously these apartment buildings are usually occupied by people who work in the big city and not in this small town, because there's usually not that many opportunities for young people, like highly educated people, in these communities. More of these block houses in here, more using Move It very extensively in this place, obviously, to make everything align. This is how it looked like after maybe one stream, I think. Maybe 2 streams, not exactly sure. And then I decided to go and do some details. In this little abandoned, well, not built block near the town center, I wanted to build a bus terminal. Definitely want to do bus connection to the big city. And usually these little towns have like a more recently built bus terminal. I decided to only create it with one main road on it, because there's probably just going to be one line connected to this place. And I wanted to build it like this, in this empty block. So I wanted to put like a small building, maybe like a little shop for, like, I don't know, tickets or some snacks or something like that, newspaper stand maybe. Doing these covered these roofs to cover the platforms, and then covering the crosswalks to make everything nicer, and just putting down some decals, even some of the road wear, to make it look like more nicer, more realistic. Finally started doing some decorations, some trees. Started with this little park in the inside of the town square. Putting down some benches as well. Just very, very light detailing. I'm definitely not doing the details as much as I could, because I really wanted to just move on and create this little town as a whole. But like I said, this was my first experience with these kinds of details, so maybe I overdid it a bit more than I'm doing now, but it turned out very nice looking. In this particular block, in this inside block, I'm doing maybe like a outside area for a restaurant, putting down some of those tables, a small parking lot, and just dividing these individual plots by these fences, hedgerows and fences, and putting down some trees as well, decorations. This tree in particular in here looks really good, creating like a nice shade for that parking lot. People are definitely going to be liking that one very much. I was not exactly doing these road decals more than in these areas, because it was kind of clear that if I want to finish this little town in some reasonable amount of time, I cannot do the details completely everywhere. Finishing up some of these blocks, as you can see here. Like I said, wanted to be as random as possible with the positions of the roads and shapes of the blocks as well. And this is pretty much already done. I was just putting down some of the trees. Yeah, some of the blocks were still empty, so I just put maybe these garage buildings in here next to the block of flat buildings, and some of the areas I had absolutely no idea what I want to do there, so maybe I just did like a parks, playgrounds for children and stuff like that. In here, this is a bus loop, like kind of a terminus bus loop, where they can turn around and head into the opposite direction. The last thing I did was this industrial area, fenced it and put concrete on the entire place, and then did some decals. As you can see here, I'm using the concrete brush and the surface painter, and then doing these decals with the panels, putting some trees around the industrial area as well, using Move It to copy it. I'm using these low poly trees because I was quite concerned with the performance that I was getting in the game, but these trees definitely look very, very good. And like I said, the last thing I did in here were these decals in the industrial area, putting these roadware decals where the actual road is to kind of make it very nice with the actual vehicles using this place, and then doing even some of this roadware, like the stains. This area in real life would definitely have like old, like worn out concrete panels on the ground, so I kind of wanted to create the illusion that they are really old, and this area is probably completely abandoned except for the new warehouse buildings and that recycling center on the side. Anyway, that was it for today's video. I hoped you liked this little build. I definitely did. I definitely enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.